Good morning. Thank you for that kind introduction, and Guten Morgen aus Glasgow. Very honored to have been asked to give this keynote conference, which DFG is organizing German Federal Education. And thank you all for joining. You'll be able to see, hopefully, a short slide pack, which I'm sharing as part of my presentation. When I was originally approached to speak at this conference, there was a certain B word, which we were all concerned about, which was, of course, Brexit, which was on everyone's mind. Well, now, of course, it's a C word, COVID-19, which dominates every discussion and from which there is no escape. So I suppose alphabetically, at least, it's progress of a kind. In the time that's allocated to me today, I'd like to share some initial thoughts on how universities might interact in the post-COVID and indeed post-Brexit world. And of course, since this conference is about research marketing, also how research can best present itself. And of course, no one has a crystal ball, and the following comes with a heavy disclaimer that we don't know how the future will unfold. However, in common with all other sectors, the higher education landscape will be changed by the COVID pandemic, and I'd like to focus on what this means on how we collaborate at the European level. I think, whilst this has been a very difficult period for all of us as individuals and citizens, let's start with some positives, because we certainly need them, and I think it tells us something about how we present research, how we market research. International research and the work going on at our universities is helping to lead the fight back against COVID-19 and the pandemic. I think this crisis has highlighted our relevance and resilience as universities. At my own institution, the University of Glasgow, we are hosting one of the UK's 3 central testing labs against the pandemic. It's the main testing facility in Scotland. And we're far from alone. There is an effort going on across the UK, across Germany. In the UK, as you know, we are leading research for a couple of vaccines. In Germany, I know university hospitals have been heavily involved in the C19 effort, alongside spin-out companies such as BioNTech and CureVac. And more recently, more broadly rather, research papers are being published at an unprecedented rate, 7,000 in the past 3 months. There are major collaborative projects such as the COVID-19 Clinical Research Coalition, the COVID Therapeutics Accelerator, and the EU's Corona Action Plan. They're all up and running, and universities are at the forefront of efforts to find a vaccine. Now, I see no reason why this will suddenly stop once the virus is brought under control. I think greater collaboration is here to stay. And this is a very positive development. First, whilst different institutions have different areas of strength, as the research-led response to the pandemic shows, we can achieve more and more quickly when we work together, as opposed to in isolation. Secondly, rarely, I think, has the power of our research and scientific expertise been more evident. It's at the front of public consciousness. And I think this is particularly important as we try to present research, as we try to market research to the general public. And I think this is important because in a world where businesses are struggling and unemployment is on the rise, we need to make the case for safeguarding research funding. And this argument is strengthened by our contribution to fighting the virus and the role that we can play in the recovery to come. Now, Germany, of course, invests very heavily in public research and development spending, and other countries should follow its lead in this regard. And I'd stress that this argument must be applied to the research ecosystem as a whole. Understandably, public health, epidemiology is grabbing all the headlines at the moment with the pandemic. But if we're serious about multidisciplinary work, then all areas of research must be strong. The arts and humanities, in social sciences, as well as science and biomedical research. However, even if this argument is successful, and I think it will be, it is important to recognize that we're not going to be afforded a free lunch by public funding. It's highly likely that future funding, both from national governments and at the EU level, will come with some strings attached, and I'll say something about this in a moment. I think we're facing a changing landscape. As I think everyone in this conference appreciates, the crisis will impact universities just as it's impacting everything else, every other sector in the economy. Over the last couple of months, universities have worked hard to expand their online offerings. thinking about new ways of delivering the student experience and how on-campus activity can take place safely in a world that's living with the virus. And here the market will be competitive. Communications and marketing will have a vital role to play in this. We're seeing this already. Universities with the best online offerings that are able to shore up confidence and protect students will cope best and protect market share. Across the board, students are rethinking their study plans. We know from global surveys of international students like QS and IDP that the number of students who are choosing to postpone their studies is increasing. We know that about 50% of students, about 49% from a QS survey, are now open to beginning their studies next term remotely, online. And so changing, and the travel for study model will be heavily impacted by the virus. And this will have a significant and material effect on university finances, especially in countries like the UK, like the US, and of course, Australia. In the UK, we're having a big debate at the moment about whether greater government support to assist universities during the crisis should be forthcoming. Our ministers have indicated a willingness to intervene. And I think this will be the trend, especially in countries where the sector is asking for additional government support. Oversight, I think, of universities will increase, and universities will be expected to contribute to the economic recovery to come. And we as universities can assist, whether it's by strengthening the economic recovery, working with industry to drive innovation, and acting as catapults for high growth new businesses. We can help socially by providing skills, not just to young people facing a fragile labour market, but to those in need of reskilling. And we can help civically by reaching out beyond our staff and students to the wider communities around us. And to policy development by providing expert advice to government and by setting the agenda in addressing the problems that we were starting to grapple with pre-crisis, such as climate change, clean energy, digitalization, and so on. And this points to some of the changes I see taking place in the research environment. I think previously collaboration was overwhelmingly driven from the bottom up. It was spurred by researchers and research groups seeking to work with one another. At Glasgow, for instance, we've seen an upward trend in the number of collaborations. In my university, between 2006 and 2009, about 48% research outputs were authored with international universities. But between 2014 and 2017, just 10 years later, this figure had risen to about 63%. Now, the UK and Germany, I think, are leaders in this collaboration space. No two countries have collaborated more frequently than the UK and Germany in Horizon 2020. More than 73,000 scientific publications have been co-authored between academics in the UK and Germany between 2013 and 2017. And there are over 3,200 German research staff working at Russell Group universities that as you heard, I represent as chairman. And there are many, many UK scientists working in German universities at the moment in German institutes. But levels of collaboration vary across the EU as a whole, and this is also true for different subject areas. Life sciences, for instance, have embraced open data at 3 times the rate of engineering. Now, I think post-COVID, we may see a shift towards more of a top-down approach, where governments and international organizations seek to be more directive about what the research their funding actually achieves. Now, this will be controversial, and the sector must, in the strongest terms, stress that academic freedom will not be compromised, and autonomy is important in research. But we cannot step away from theoretical, and we cannot step away from theoretical or discovery research. It would be counterproductive for the state or indeed any arm's-length funding body to exert anything more than limited oversight. But I think if done sensitively and in consultation with the research sector, with the higher education sector, we might be able to shape a model that is more agile and civically focused than pre-crisis after this crisis ends. Last year, I produced a report for the Scottish Government on how to drive forward innovation in Scotland. And whilst this was, of course, produced in a Scottish context, I found an environment that was overly fragmented in Scotland and which suffered from a lack of focus. And what I did in that report is I called for a shared national mission to be agreed between government, universities, and industry to help to help coordinate activity. Now, I believe that this still stands. I believe that agreeing common R&D frameworks can help accelerate economic recovery. And given the massive fiscal expenditures that are necessary across Europe to deal with COVID and its effects, I think economic recovery has to be driven. It's essential, and the role the universities will play in that is absolutely pivotal. Now, I know this triple helix collaboration AFK into the federal ministry, but it's also imperative that we link these national frameworks together at the European level, whilst acknowledging that they may be at a different point of maturity. Apart from anything else, I think it will help ensure that we have the resilience required to cope with future challenges coming down the track. So this is not to say that we won't compete. Of course we will, over students, staff, and much else besides. They're not model. But I think the direction of travel is clear. Universities will have to learn to live with greater oversight in future, and greater collaboration with each other and with industry, small, medium, and large, will be the buzzword. And so civic responsibility. And again, since this is a research marketing conference, positioning universities in that space is really important. Even before the crisis, the new EU Commissioner, Maria Gabriel, was speaking of the need to ensure research is inclusive. And the forthcoming renewal of the European research area is likely to place emphasis on citizen engagement and align with its policy goals. Again, a really important opportunity for research marketing. This thinking was also detectable within Ursula von der Leyen's speech to the European Parliament last week, which talked about using an EU strategic investment facility to strengthen key value chains, crucial for future resilience. And again, whilst universities must stress the importance of basic and discovery research, ultimately it is better for universities to engage in this process. We must engage with government. We must engage with EU institutions. If strings are to be attached to research funding, then we can use our collective influence at national and European level to ensure that these are at least the right strings for our economies and for our societies. And finally, let me come to the issue of Brexit, which was the original reason for this invitation, I think. But of course, I speak as the president of a UK and a Scottish university. And while Brexit may be off the front pages at the moment, it has not entirely disappeared from view. You may have seen the press statements on Friday, which indicated that little progress has been made during the most recent round of EU-UK negotiations. So from our perspective, as a Russell Group and as a research-intensive university, our universities have called on UK government to agree early association to Horizon Europe with the EU. And if this is not possible, for us to create a bridging scheme so that collaboration can continue as seamlessly as it did under Horizon 2020. We in the Russell Group, as research universities, see that as very important, and we've maintained a very close dialogue in the last 2 years with the German U15 group of universities. I think the evidence is very clear. Our shared endeavours maximise impact. In the UK, the average field-weighted citation is 1.5. In Germany, 1.39. However, when our British and German academics work together, this index jumps to 2.90. Now, we shouldn't jeopardize this, and while we must wait and see as to what emerges, I believe that our governments will recognize the need to continue our collaborations and to find a way forward. Ultimately, anything that severely limits the UK's participation in Horizon Europe or Erasmus, etc., would be self-defeating. As I've made clear throughout this presentation, research and innovation will be critical in supporting the economic recovery to come. Measures that limit access to talent, that prevent movement, that direct barriers to collaboration will not boost economic growth and must be avoided. It remains to be seen how the current EU negotiations, UK negotiations will conclude, or if they are extended due to COVID-19. It is difficult because of the nature of the withdrawal agreement, which only allows a single point extension. But let us hope that discussions will continue. Let us hope that they will be productive for the benefit of both our nations, of Germany and the UK, and indeed the whole European Union. But as with much else, we will have to wait and see. I think that's about the only thing that I can say for certain. Thank you very much. Vielen Dank.